I guess we're doing the Piers Morgan thing here with Vivek Ramaswamy. I'm not a big fan of Vivek Ramaswamy. I think he has a Silicon Valley mentality that he's trying to bring to DC that's not going to work. What I mean is, it's like the tech startup, like, oh, we're just going to throw whatever we can at the wall, and if it doesn't stick, well, that sucks. We'll declare bankruptcy. We'll move on to the next. Move on to the next project. Problem is, you can't do that with a country. And he's proposing, like, oh, we'll just give the Russians Ukraine, and that in order for them to work with us against the Chinese, he's just throwing stuff at the wall. And you can see that from his lack of experience when he talks about these issues. We talk about this all the time. But he was one of the guys who was walking around saying that weapons we were sending to Ukraine was being diverted and funneled through corruption to the cartels, and was posting images of cartel fighters carrying what he said were javelins. But if anybody who has ever seen a javelin before, and I have, would know that isn't a javelin. That was a Swedish system. It's not even an American system. He got the whole country wrong. Not only did he get the weapon systems wrong, he got the whole country where the weapon derived from wrong. Point is, he doesn't know that much about the war in Ukraine, and his like tech bro startup mentality, I think, is the wrong way to approach the country. If I've learned anything through the last 8 years of politics, is I'm sick of people with no experience in public office, no experience in legislating, no experience in crafting policy, no experience whatsoever in politics, saying, you know what, instead of running for like mayor, county council, or some local office, I'm going to run for the highest office of the land. What qualifies me? Money. I ran a business, and I'm going to run this country like I ran my business and lay everyone off. Anyway, let's watch his interview with Piers Morgan over whether he wants to give Russia what they want. Give Russia what Putin stole. Let's listen.
If you won the presidency in 2024,
I would do a deal that ends this war.
What's your deal? I mean, you and
Here's
Donald
the deal.
Trump talk about, we're going to sort it
Well,
all
I'll
out
give you
tomorrow.
detail. In my case, I'll give you details.
You would give Putin what he's taken. Right?
I won't give him anything. There's a deal.
What would you give him?
I wouldn't give him anything. I would give him a deal.
What's the deal he's going to take then?
Well, here's the deal. He has to exit his military alliance with Xi Jinping.
What does that even mean? Which military alliance? What does that even mean? What? There's not. What is he talking about when he says military alliance? Is he talking about they do military drills together? There's no alliance that says if Russia's invaded, China will send soldiers, or if China's invaded, Russia will send soldiers. If anything, you can see from the Russian invasion of Ukraine right now that China is not sending its soldiers over. It's not getting itself tangled up in all that nonsense. When he says military alliance, what is he referring to? Is he asking that Russia and China no longer do military drills or naval drills together? Is he asking that if they have any like intelligence sharing arrangements, they no longer do that? Is he saying that on the world stage, when they work together on UN votes, he wants to break that up? I don't know what he means when he says break up the Russian-Chinese military alliance. Is it that Russia and China both want America's influence to go down in the world, both for their own reasons? And so Vivek is going to try to convince the Russians otherwise, that it would actually be better if China went down in global influence and America continued to be dominant? Is that what he's going to try to pitch to Putin? Because if that's what he's going to try to pitch to Putin, I don't think it's going to work. I think what will end up happening is he gives Russia what they want. Russia says, sure, yeah, we'll do that. And then nothing changes. And the only difference is now Russia has what they want.
End the Russia-China military alliance. That's the top threat that the U.S.
What's
faces.
the deal with?
What does that even mean? Oh, sorry. Okay. Is there some? Okay, let me Google this just to make sure that I'm not a dunce. Russian, China, military
Burns
alliance.
is an immoral,
Because I cannot
corrupt,
figure. I'm trying to.
bankrupt man.
Although neither Beijing nor Moscow currently has planned to establish foreign military alliance, something could bring it about. Okay, so I'm not a dunce. I've just, every time I hear a presidential candidate say something like that, I always first come to the conclusion like, no, I must be wrong. They wouldn't go on national television and say such a ridiculous thing. I must be wrong. Anaconda, thank you for the tier 1. Appreciate it.
Was Ukraine
And then in
territory.
return, what we get is a hard commitment that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO.
So his deal is, I want Russia and China to break up the alliance they don't have, and in response, we will, in reward for doing nothing, we will give Russia a commitment that Ukraine to not join NATO and remove the leverage that Ukraine has as NATO membership, or the possibility of NATO membership provides them. Okay, got you. I really want to understand what he means by Russia-China military alliance. He must mean some drill or just like some productive relationship they have. He must be using it very using the term loosely.
Truth, that's just keeping.
But what about the land he's taking?
Well, this is the most important part. Is the NATO hard? This is what matters most to Putin. There's other parts of this deal I can talk about on both sides. The most important element of each, and then I can go to the second most. The most important element is Russia exit its military alliance with China. We make a hard commitment that NATO not admit Ukraine to NATO, which, by the way, Piers, that violates, we've systematically violated a commitment we made back in 1990. James Baker, the U.S. Secretary of State, made a commitment to Gorbachev.
Tell me on this.
Okay, so I'm going to say a few things. First thing is, we don't know this. We don't know that James Baker made that commitment. And if that commitment was made, it was never formally recognized as in written on paper, something that we have a record of. We do not have record of that happening outside of like an offbeat mention. There is no treaty that was signed up between us and the Russians saying NATO will never expand again. And it wouldn't make sense for that treaty to have been signed, because at the point when it was signed, the Soviet Union was still around. And the Soviet Union was not planning to destroy itself. The Soviet Union was trying to preserve itself. It failed, but it wouldn't even make sense. And I know Gorbachev has said on multiple occasions that the deal that was made was to stop the expansion, and we do have a written record of this, to stop the expansion of NATO bases into East Germany. Because what was being negotiated at that time was the reuniting of Germany. So I think it makes a lot more sense when you're negotiating Germany being reunited to make a deal about not expanding NATO bases into East Germany, which would be seen as provocative at the time, than for them to make a deal that there will never be an expansion of NATO into any country ever again, which we don't have a written record of, and we don't have any treaty of. We don't have any of that. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying that it's far from guaranteed, as Vivek is trying to present here.
This deal.
And then here we'd freeze the current lines of control.
Okay, freeze the current lines of control. So that means Russia would keep Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, Kherson, and Crimea. That would mean keeping 80% of Ukraine's coastline and around 18 to 19% of its country.
The current lines of control.
What?
Freeze the current lines of control.
You would give Putin everything
I wouldn't
he's
give him
stolen?
anything. I would freeze the current lines of control.
What do you mean? What does that mean?
These are Russian-speaking regions that are occupied today.
You would literally give Putin what he's stolen.
Only.
You would give a guy.
I'm not giving.
Okay, so I'm sorry I keep pausing, but this is, I love seeing Piers Morgan just like gobsmacked at this statement. Just gobsmacked. Because Vivek Ramaswamy spent like a minute and a half saying, I'm not going to give him anything. I'm not going to give him anything. No, so you're going to give him what he want? No, I'm not going to give him anything. I'm not going to give him anything. Outside of a commitment that Ukraine will never join the organization that could actually stop them from getting invaded, as well as 20% of Ukraine. What do you mean? You can't say we're not going to give him anything and then say, okay, give him what he stole. Let him keep it. Freeze the line of control. Say Ukraine will not join NATO, and then just pray that another war will not happen, because that will be all that is stopping another war from happening. This is the problem with this type of peacenik bullshit that you get from Vivek Ramaswamy and you get from other numbskull commentators. They portray themselves as great diplomats, people who are willing to have the conversations that no one else has, because they're not embedded with the establishment, they're not embedded with the military-industrial complex, they're not embedded with the machine. Oh, sorry, that's not what it's called anymore. Now it's the deep state, the swamp, whatever you want to call it. And so they're willing to go talk to the Russians and make a deal that no one else is, and are willing to bite on the bullets of hard truth, which is Ukraine can never win. And, well, those guys are all basically Russian anyway, so just let them have it. And therefore, we will avoid this whole silly war, avoid spending another dime, and have saved everyone's lives. We're the hero. At least that's the pitch. Here's a few problems with that pitch. The first problem is that it's based upon a bunch of conclusions that we shouldn't necessarily conclude. Number one, that Ukraine couldn't win. And when I say win, I mean push the Russians out of Ukraine. Vivek doesn't know that. The people around him don't know that. I would never trust him with the expertise to come to that conclusion. We can make a statement about whether they can win with the materials they currently have or with more material presented to them by the West later or given to them by the West in aid packages. Because I would say that a Ukraine with 1,000 artillery guns is very different than a Ukraine with 2,000 artillery guns with artillery shells to match in its ability to win. So it's based upon a bunch of things, a bunch of conclusions that you shouldn't conclude. The James Baker thing is another example of that. The idea that weapons are being funneled from Ukraine into Mexico for the cartels is another example of that. The idea that the money is being washed and is a big money laundering scheme is another example of that. There's so much information that Vivek is basing his conclusions on that is just wrong that it's hard for me to see eye to eye with him. So that's the first thing. The second problem I have with him, in this image of him being the great negotiator, is his position is give the Russians everything they want in return for commitments. We're going to freeze the line of control, and we're going to commit to not allowing Ukraine to join NATO. So remove that leverage from the negotiating table from Ukraine forever, where in the past they could say, Ukraine, to the Russians, hey, maybe you should not mistreat me. I have other options. I could join the EU. I can join NATO. I could go to the Americans. I could go to the British. I could go to the Germans. In the future, Ukraine will have to face the reality of, well, I can't go to anyone else. You're right here. It is what it is. I guess I just got to make a deal with you. No matter how painful it is, whether it's Russian domination of our energy exports and imports, whether it's Russian domination of the transition of gas across Ukraine's borders, whether it's control of their coal, whether it's control of any part of their debt, they just have to make the deal because they no longer can rely upon a counterbalance, which is the possibility of NATO membership. So that's what we're going to give the Russians. We're going to give the Russians a lack of competition for Ukraine's favor and Ukraine boxed out of the Western alliance structure. So that's the first thing we give them. The second thing we give the Russians is a freezing of the conflict. Now, not only does this give Russia over 80% of Ukraine's coastline, not only does this give Russia a lot more land than they had before the invasion, even if it's not all of what they wanted, but we also basically give Russia a free hand to govern and control those territories as they please. So if they want to engage in a campaign of ethnic cleansing, if they want to engage in looting, if they want to engage in the murder of the populace, I know many of you have probably heard of the story that happened over the weekend of that family of 9, including children as young as 5 and 9 years old, being killed in their homes by Russian soldiers after they refused to turn over their home to the Russian soldiers to use for military operations. That type of behavior will continue in perpetuity in the occupied territories for the foreseeable future. So that is something we are allowing the Russians to do. We are giving them the land, we are giving them that control of the territory, and we're removing a counterbalance that the Ukrainians could use in negotiations with the Russians and as a fallback. So we're boxing out the Ukrainians and giving the Russians land in return for the ending of a military alliance that doesn't even exist. And if there's not a formal treaty being ripped up between the Chinese and the Russians, what exactly are we ending? What exactly is he requesting in return for all of these demands? Is it just that Russia and China work together less? Less military drill? What is it? To end this alliance? I genuinely don't know. Does he think that by giving Russia the tools to continue building their empire for a commitment that they do not work to end U.S. hegemony, U.S. dominance on the global stage, or the dominance of the quote-unquote like global order, the international rules-based order, that just that commitment alone will be enough, that they won't work with the Chinese to do that, that they'll just turn around and all of a sudden love the same international rule-based order that deemed that Putin was a war criminal for kidnapping 19.5 thousand Ukrainian children. This is fantasy. It would never work, and Putin would snatch Vivek Ramaswamy's pockets, take him for a spin, and steal his sneakers while he's at it. It would never work. And the worst part about this is, how does this guarantee peace? What physical guarantee do we have that the Russians wouldn't just invade Ukraine again in 5 to 10 years after our weapon shipments have stopped, after our intelligence sharing has stopped, which is something the Russians are going to demand, and after the Ukrainians have demobilized or have been boxed out? What will stop the Russians from waiting 1, 2, maybe 3, 4, 5 years, invading again when no one's looking, when no one's paying attention? Maybe when somebody's in office that's not Zelensky, that can't bring as much attention to it from his experience in media. Maybe when America's tied up with some other foreign war, other conflict, or is going through a bout of isolationism. Maybe America will be facing some type of economic problem. What would stop Russia from immediately, once it senses an opportunity to strike while we're distracted, from invading Ukraine again? Do we think we could get a commitment from Vivek Ramaswamy in these negotiations that if Ukraine is invaded again, that we're going to send troops and defend them? No. And so in this plan, in this proposal, there is nothing, literally nothing, stopping the Russians from just invading Ukraine again at the next opportunity. Now, with the knowledge that there's no chance of Ukraine joining NATO, and that the West is not going to be supplying Ukraine under a Vivek Ramaswamy administration, which has announced openly that he doesn't think it's worth the money. His plan would lead to us getting nothing, the Russians getting around 20% of Ukraine's territory, 80% of its coastline, turning Ukraine into an economically rump state, economically defunct, sending it into political chaos once it realizes that its occupied territories are going to stay occupied for a very long time, and possibly undermine the democratization, the process of democratizing Ukrainian society. As many will think, wow, the Western liberal democratic system has failed us. Obviously, it was too weak to deal with the Russian invasion. Why should we adopt this system that was too weak and too fragile and too fickle to stand with us over 2 years? This plan makes no sense. Makes no sense. We give the Russians everything, we get nothing, and the war could start again in 5 years. Piers is 100% justified to have the reaction that he's having.
I mean, anything. I'm giving him a deal.
What did you describe him as to me
It's
again?
conditioned.
What did you call Putin?
He's an evil dictator.
You give an
So is
evil
Xi Jinping.
dictator
So are countless others.
land he's stolen by killing people. You would give him the...
And I mean, this goes without saying, but the idea that those are Russian-speaking reasons, like, matters at all, or that has any impact, like, it's fucking silly. I'm going to be releasing an interview on the main channel tomorrow with 4 Ukrainians responding to a lot of these talking points, responding to a lot of the dialogue we see in the American media space around the war, talking about how these conceptions, where these preconceptions came from, why they're wrong. But I think 2, maybe 2.5, depending on how you look at somebody's family history, half of the people we interviewed for that spoke Russian, grew up speaking Russian. Every single one of them identified themselves as Ukrainian. Just because somebody speaks Russian does not mean they want to be part of Russia. This is dumb. This is stupid. And I think with any number of reflection, we could realize how stupid it is. Just compare it, for example, to the United States. What language am I speaking in? I'm speaking in English. Am I British now? You guys in chat, you're all speaking English. Are you guys all British? What about the different countries in Africa that speak French? Do they all identify themselves as French? Same thing with Portuguese. Same thing with Dutch. Same thing with any number of languages. Just because somebody in Ukraine speaks Russian does not mean they want to be part of Russia. I've interviewed plenty of Russian speakers who don't want to be part of Russia. In fact, my first time I ever went to the forward operating position, I never heard a lick of Ukrainian. Every single member of the territorial defense that I interviewed was a Russian speaker. None of them wanted their homes to be overtaken by Putin's government.
The land.
Pierce, I'm not going to give him anything. I'm giving him a deal.
You've just said you give him the whole.
I'm not going to give him. That's your word, not mine. I'd give him a deal. What I would do is, no, we would require Russia to exit its military alliance with China.
There's no military alliance with China. I don't know what he's talking about, man. I concentrate on these things a lot more than the average person. How is the average person supposed to make out what he even means by this if I don't know what he means? Because there is no military alliance. What is he referring to? What is he talking about?
What threatens the United States of America?
What message are you
the
sending?
Russian-China military alliance.
By the way, the whole like going back and forth over whether he would give them the land or not give them the land, he already said he would. This is just a question about framing. He doesn't want the headline to be Vivek Ramaswamy says that we should give Russia Ukrainian land. He doesn't want that headline because that headline looks bad. It makes him look like a thug who just wants to like help a mugger steal from Ukraine. It doesn't look good. It's a bad look. So what does he do? He just denies it and just says, no, I want to offer them a deal, not offer them their land, but the deal includes their land. It's just silly parlor tricks.
You're president of the United States, and you say, all right, Vladimir, I know you invaded illegally a sovereign democratic country, and they fought for
It's not a democratic country.
And they fought
Ukraine is not a democratic country.
And they fought for
Ukraine is not a democratic country.
I don't agree with you.
I mean,
I don't agree with
look
you.
at what they're doing to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church right now.
Let me finish
this. It's just a myth.
Let me finish.
But we're having a mythological conversation.
Well, you
Ukraine
don't think it
is not a democratic country.
People of Ukraine.
I don't know. Like, he gets everything he believes from Twitter. I genuinely believe that Vivek Ramaswamy gets everything he believes from Twitter.com. Then we're not a democratic country. Then the UK is not a democratic country. Under the standards that he is laying out right now, there is no such thing as democracy around the world. During World War II, we took Japanese people and we put them in internment camps, not because they believed in something, not because of their stated political beliefs or intentions to undermine the United States, simply because they were Japanese. But saying that America was not a democracy at that point would be inaccurate. It was a democracy, a flawed democracy, like most democracies. No, all democracies are, some more flawed than others, but it was a democracy. That was the system. If you compare it to a monarchy or some type of authoritarian dictatorship, it was a democracy, just like the UK, just like the United Kingdom was, even though it was engaged in anti-democratic actions in Ireland, in India, in Bangladesh, all around the world. When it comes to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, I mean the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, not the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church is one, because I hear this all the time. Sometimes the version is Ukraine banned Christianity, which is silly. 78% of Ukrainian population is Orthodox Christian. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and not the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. The Orthodox Church of Ukraine is a pro-Ukrainian government, not pro-Ukrainian government, but pro-Ukrainian anti-Moscow Patriarch Orthodox Church. And the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, until very recently, sweared loyalty to the Patriarch of Russia, the Russian Orthodox Church, the Patriarch Kirill, who said that if Russian soldiers go to Ukraine and die, they will go to heaven. This church has been awash in either people who directly wanted the Russians to invade and supports the invasion, or has collaborated with the invasion, or has tried to sell, it was a case that was broke recently, try to sell guns on the black market, or collaborate with the invaders. And we do know that Russia has tried to use the Russian Orthodox Church to spy, not only in Ukraine, but in the United States as well. When Russian officials were coming into the United States, they were picked up with documents on their person explaining to Russian Orthodox Church members, people who are working on behalf of the Russian government in the United States, how to use their position to spy for the Russian government. They were trying to put out feelers to use the Russian Orthodox Church to spy for the Russian government in the United States, in America. So if they were trying to do that in the United States, what do you think they would do in a country that they have an interconnected highway system with that they're invading? So the legislation, so again, this is not all to say that therefore this church should be banned. That's to give some clarification as to why this church was banned. And let's talk about the legislation in question that he's talking about. The legislation in question, which I don't even think has officially been passed yet. I think it passed through like one body, and it's going through like a second check, and there's still some like reviews it has to go through, but it will probably pass. The legislation in question says that any government, if a nation state invades Ukraine and there is a religious institution that is based in that nation's capital or based in that nation, that religion, that church, that institution, not the religion, but the church cannot operate within Ukraine. That is the legislation. So it's not even like, in effect, it bans the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, but it's not like a blanket ban of the Orthodox faith. It's not a ban of people being Christian. It's a specific ban of one church in the Orthodox faith that has a history of spying, has a history of influence peddling, and has a history of collaborating with the Russian government. Now, you can look at all of that and still say it's wrong. The branch in Ukraine disassociated from the Moscow Patriarch. This is wrong. I stand against it. You can still have that position. But don't get high and mighty and start pretending that if the United States or Canada or the United Kingdom or any other democracy around the world was invaded and faced a similar situation, it wouldn't A, consider or B, enact the same exact legislation. That's only the context I want to provide to this. That's the only context I want to provide, because he won't provide it, and he'll instead try to base that position right there, that one position the Ukrainian government has taken, to try to say that it's not a democracy. Putin's government, Ukraine's government, indistinguishable, both authoritarian governments. I mean, it doesn't matter that one had a democratically elected leadership, or it has a parliament that's democratically elected. None of that matters. Fuck all of that. Fuck the election monitors. Fuck the differences between freedom of speech and any of that. Fuck that. All of it. This church. It's very simplistic. It's dumbing down the issue.
Ukraine voted for democracy in massive majority.
Except for the ones that didn't vote that happened to be in the regions occupied by Russia.
But you would give...
What is that? Look how fucking smug this smarmy piece of shit is when he says something like that. What does that even mean? That he contributed nothing there. Piers Morgan says that the Ukrainian people voted for democracy and they want democracy. And his response is, except for the ones in regions occupied by Russia. What is that even supposed to mean? If they're in regions occupied by Russia, then they can't vote. America's not a democracy under Lincoln. People in Texas can't vote anymore. That's very mean to the people of Texas. What do you mean? Of course they can't vote. They're controlled by the rebels, or in this instance, they're controlled by a foreign army that invaded and occupied the land. Do you think if China invaded the United States and was occupying California, that people in LA would be able to vote for the next president? No, they'd be stopped. They'd be stopped by the occupiers. I don't know how this is supposed to be a point against Ukraine being a democracy. What is Ukraine supposed to do? Is Ukraine supposed to send in ballots to occupied territory? Is Ukraine supposed to send in election observer? What are they supposed to do? They can't hold the election. They can't set up voting booths. They can't hold the vote because the Russians won't let them. How is that a point against Ukrainian democracy?
This area they've stolen back to the Russians, right? So you're telling,
I would not.
You're telling
it would be conditioned.
You're telling every...
I would not do anything other than we get what we want in return.
You're telling every evil...
We would get nothing in return.
Dictator in the world, you can go and invade any country you like.
Vivek Ramaswamy would go into office, give everything to Russia, and then leave. Would do nothing else on the issue. He would get nothing out of them. He would get clowned on. He would be an international laughingstock. He might even be worse than Trump, because at least Trump like had some bite in him, you know? Like if somebody whispered in his ear, like, I think he's playing you, I think he's fucking you.
Take whatever land you can.
And then he'd get angry and then he'd stop it. With Vivek Ramaswamy, I think he might actually buy his own bullshit.
In a bloody war for as long as
Here's
you like,
what I find fascinating.
And then eventually I'll just give it to you.
How much?
I'm not watching the full interview. It's not worth it. Considering how long it took me just to respond to this, I don't want to make that type of a time commitment. All I want to say about this is Vivek Ramaswamy still does not know what he's talking about.